At our team dinner, my boss stood up, tapped his fork to silence the room, and called me a freeloader, then told the waiter to bring me the check. I wish I could say I fired back in that moment, that I gave him the kind of comeback people upvote on Reddit until it hits the front page. But I didn't. I sat there, heat crawling up my neck, every nerve screaming at me to defend myself, and I said nothing. I was too shocked to even move. The restaurant was one of those places managers choose when they want to prove how important they are. Dim lighting, wine racks against every wall, servers who glide instead of walk. The kind of place I couldn't afford unless I skipped rent. The company had booked a private room, long table, white tablecloth, expensive cutlery laid out like weapons waiting to be used. I'd taken the last seat near the end, thinking I'd stay quiet, eat politely, and slip out. My boss, Daniel, loved this theater. He was the kind of man who always laughed first at his own jokes, who took the middle seat like it was a throne. Mid-40s, slick hair, tailored blazer, and a voice that could fill a room without a mic. He was halfway through his second glass of wine when he clinked his fork and stood up. "Let's take a moment," he said, raising his glass like he was about to toast a wedding. "We've got a great team here, hardworking, dedicated, and then," he gestured toward me, "we've got our little freeloader." The table froze. A couple of people gave those nervous chuckles you do when you're not sure if it's a joke. Others looked down at their plates like maybe if they ignored it, the moment would pass. The intern, just out of college, nephew of the CFO, looked at me with wide eyes, then back at his plate. My fork hovered over my food, useless. "Come on, Daniel," someone murmured, but he wasn't done. "I mean, 5 months in the department, and not a single dinner picked up? Always there for the free ride, right?" He smiled, the kind of smile people use when they've decided humiliation is entertainment. "Tell you what, tonight's on her. Bring her the bill." The waiter, a man in a pressed vest who looked like he'd been trained not to react to anything, nodded and disappeared. My stomach twisted. I made just enough to cover rent, groceries, and bus fare. One meal here was half my paycheck. Daniel sat down like he'd scored a touchdown, laughing to himself. Nobody joined in. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the scrape of a knife against porcelain, someone clearing their throat too loudly. The waiter returned with the leather folder and set it gently in front of me. I opened it with shaking hands. 3 bottles of wine, 2 seafood towers, steaks, sides, desserts, over $1,000. My card felt thin and stupid in my hand, like even it knew it didn't belong there. I slid it across the table. The waiter took it without blinking, but as he turned away, he did something odd. He slipped a second slip of paper onto the table, tucked discreetly beneath the first receipt. I caught it just before it slid to the floor. An itemized breakdown with the timestamp, the server ID, the table number printed in bold. I folded it quickly and pushed it into my bag. Daniel raised his glass again. "See? Team player?" My throat burned, but I forced a smile. Nobody met my eyes. The waiter returned, handed me the receipt and card, and murmured, "Thank you, miss." His voice was softer than before. I signed the slip, pocketed the second copy, and sat back in my chair. The rest of dinner went on like nothing had happened. People chatted, laughed too loudly at Daniel's recycled stories, kept their eyes anywhere but on me. The intern excused himself early, mumbling something about an early meeting. I just nodded. When the plates were cleared and people started gathering their coats, Daniel slapped me on the shoulder. "Don't worry, we'll pay you back." His grin made it clear he wouldn't. I walked out into the night air, my legs trembling, receipt still burning in my pocket. I tilted my head back and saw a camera mounted above the restaurant door, little red light blinking steadily, watching, recording. As I waited for the bus, I unfolded the paper again. Time, date, server ID, table number, proof. Daniel thought the story ended with me swallowing the humiliation, but I already knew it was just the beginning. The next morning, I didn't argue. I audited. That's the only way I know how to process humiliation, by turning it into data. While Daniel probably nursed a hangover and congratulated himself on being funny, I sat at my desk with cold coffee and opened Concur, the expense portal every employee hated. Most people clicked approve and hoped for the best. I clicked download all. Line after line scrolled across my screen. Client entertainment, strategic team meal, leadership networking dinner, same restaurant names, same handful of dates, but something didn't add up. A client dinner last month with no client on the calendar. A networking meal where every attendee was just our team. And then, twice, 2 separate receipts from the same night. Different amounts, reimbursed under different categories. It was sloppy, and it was a pattern. I remembered the way he'd leaned back at the dinner, smirking while I handed over my card. That wasn't improvisation. That was routine. But it wasn't just the meals. I scrolled through Slack, searching my name in old threads. Over and over, I saw my updates rewritten. A report I'd drafted on streamlining vendor contracts, Daniel had pasted my bullet points into his own message, adding, as I suggested last quarter. A slide I built for a quarterly review, my name replaced with team contributions. I hadn't noticed how much he'd sanded me out of the narrative until I lined it all up in one folder. The silence in the office was thick that morning. Most people were working remote, but I came in deliberately. I wanted to be near the paper trail, the printer, the storage rooms. I wanted to hear the hum of the building around me, not just the buzz of my laptop fan. At lunch, I walked back to the restaurant. Not for food, I couldn't even smell it without my stomach tightening, but for proof. The manager, a tall man with a shaved head and sharp eyes, recognized me before I even said a word. "You were here last night," he said, voice even. "Yes," I admitted, shifting awkwardly. I paid. Can I ask something?" He didn't make me finish. He already had a folder in his hands like he'd been expecting me. He pulled out a crisp printout. Itemized bill, timestamp, server ID, table number. He stamped it with the restaurant seal. "You didn't ask for this," he said, sliding it across, "but I think you might need it." I stared at the paper. My throat felt tight. Do you have audio?" He hesitated. "Policy is we keep camera footage and ambient audio for 30 days. For disputes, liability. It's all above board. But I'd need legal cause to release it." That was enough. Just knowing it existed made my pulse quicken. I tucked the folder into my bag, thanked him, and walked out into the noise of traffic. That night, I read the company policy line by line. Anti-retaliation clause, expense ethics, whistleblower hotline. I took notes in the margins, underlined key phrases. My notebook filled with scribbles, arrows, cross-references. When midnight came, I opened my email and started drafting a message to compliance. My fingers flew across the keys, attaching scans of receipts, Slack messages, calendar invites. The story built itself. I hovered over send, then I stopped. No, not yet. If I moved too soon, he'd twist it. He'd call it a misunderstanding, claim it was just a joke, bury it under his charm. I needed more than one night of evidence. I needed a pattern, airtight and undeniable. So I deleted the draft, and instead I wrote one sentence at the top of a blank page in my notebook. 3 more pieces. Until I had them, I would stay silent. But this time my silence wouldn't be weakness. It would be a blade. Corporate lies are big. Expense lies are petty. That's why they're perfect. If you want to topple a man like Daniel, you don't chase the $1 million contracts he brags about. You chase the $87 sushi bill he submitted twice. That's where arrogance gets lazy. That's where the cracks start to show. Piece number 1 was the double dip. I found it 3 days later, buried in the reimbursement portal. Same restaurant, same date. 2 slightly different totals. One marked client dinner, the other team appreciation. Both approved, both reimbursed. He hadn't even bothered to change the number of attendees, just copy-pasted. Piece number 2 came from pure coincidence. A calendar entry. Dinner W. Global Client X. Essential. But the supposed client, he was on a transatlantic flight that same night. I confirmed it through an open LinkedIn post, where the man complained about delayed boarding in Frankfurt. The timestamp matched Daniel's client dinner exactly. I screenshotted both side by side, flight tracker and expense report. Piece number 3 was handed to me by Daniel himself. He was careless after drinks, too smug to realize Slack voice notes don't vanish. In one, sent to another manager in the back of an Uber, he chuckled, "Had to teach her a lesson about a contribution. Don't worry, I'll expense it anyway." He thought he was being clever. All it did was give me the missing nail for his coffin. Each piece on its own could be brushed off. Together, they were a story. Meanwhile, the humiliation didn't stop. In meetings, he forgot to invite me, then asked me to send the minutes afterward. He lifted my graphs for his deck, but cropped out my watermark. He made me take notes in front of people I'd trained. A petty tyranny, but one that stacked up, like bricks in a wall I was building behind him. I spent nights scanning receipts, exporting Slack logs, cross-referencing dates. I uploaded everything to a private drive and hashed the files. Digital fingerprints no one could alter. I was meticulous because Daniel was careless. That was our difference. When the folder finally felt heavy enough, I wrote my report. Not an essay, not a rant, just facts, dates, times, documents. No adjectives, no anger, just his own behavior laid out like bones on a table. I sent it to compliance, attached everything, and BCC'd the legal intake email listed in the whistleblower policy. My finger hovered only a second this time before hitting send. The reply was instant. Your report has been received. And then silence. 10 days passed. 10 long days where Daniel strutted around like a king, bragging about keeping the budget lean, while I watched colleagues avoid my eyes. I thought maybe nothing would happen, that my packet had been buried under red tape. Then on a Tuesday afternoon, my calendar pinged. A new invite had appeared. Q2 Leadership Dinner, Budget Stewardship. The location, the same restaurant, and under required attendees, one name stood out, Daniel. Mine wasn't listed, but that didn't matter. I knew I was going anyway. If you burn me at a dinner table, expect me to reorder the menu. The invite wasn't for me. My name wasn't anywhere on it. But Daniel stopped by my desk that afternoon, smug as ever, and said, "Print the handouts for tonight's leadership dinner. Drop them off at the venue by 6. He thought it was a small errand. To me, it was an opening. The restaurant looked different in daylight, less glamorous, more like any other corner bistro, but the private room upstairs was already set. White linen stretched taut across the long table. Polished glasses reflected the low amber lights, and the scent of grilled meat and garlic butter clung to the air. I dropped the folder of agendas at the front, and that's when I saw him. The same manager from before, the one who'd handed me that stamped receipt. He gave me a nod, not a smile, not a wink, just a quiet acknowledgement, like he knew exactly why I was here. I didn't go into the private room. I took a seat at the bar, far enough to be invisible, close enough to hear the clatter of plates and the cadence of voices through the walls. From where I sat, I could see the door and the reflection of the table in the bar's long mirror. The CFO arrived first, stern, silver hair, the kind of man who spoke softly so people leaned in to hear. Behind him came 2 VPs, stiff in their suits, and then Daniel, chest out, blazer sharp, laughing too loudly as he shook hands. He was in his element again, same throne seat in the middle. My stomach tightened. And then I noticed someone else slipping in quietly, the compliance director. She didn't belong at dinners like this. Her job was to investigate, to write reports no one wanted to read. But here she was, manila folder tucked under her arm, expression unreadable. She leaned toward the CFO and whispered something. His brows rose, but he didn't speak. I ordered a soda water I didn't touch. My heart was too loud in my ears. Half an hour in, the bar manager came over. "You want to hear the toast from out here?" he asked softly, almost casual. Then he tilted his head toward a small speaker near the shelf of wine bottles. I realized it wasn't just decorative. It was a monitor feed from the private room. Restaurant policy. Liability. He turned the volume up a notch. Through the hum, I caught Daniel's voice. Confident. Too confident. He was in the middle of another story about squeezing efficiency out of budgets, turning costs into teachable moments. The laughter that followed was forced, brittle. The CFO didn't laugh. He tapped his glass once, sharp. The room fell silent. I leaned forward on the bar, hands tight around the glass I hadn't sipped. This was it. Something was about to shift, and I was sitting close enough to hear it happen. He raised his glass. The CFO raised the bill. I'll never forget the sound. The scrape of crystal against wood as the CFO set down a folder right in front of Daniel. Not the usual toast, not a joke, just paper, heavy and deliberate, dropped into the middle of the table. Let's talk about stewardship, the CFO said quietly. No microphone, no raised voice, just the kind of tone that carried because everyone was too nervous to breathe. I gripped my untouched glass at the bar, listening through the feed. Daniel laughed at first. Of course, happy to walk through the numbers. He reached for the folder like it was his prop. But when he opened it, his laugh faltered. Inside were receipts, dozens of them. Highlighted, stamped, cross-referenced. The CFO flipped one toward him. March 12th. Dinner logged as client entertainment. He looked around the table. Client was boarding a flight in Frankfurt at that time. Silence. Another page. April 4th. 2 separate reimbursements. Same establishment, same evening. Different codes. Both approved. A VP cleared his throat, tried to hide it with a cough. The compliance director slid forward another sheet. There's also a recording, she said, from the venue's own liability system. Audio confirms the dinner was internal only, and Mr. Daniels, she didn't even call him Daniel, just Mr. Daniels, directed a junior employee to pay. The manager at the bar didn't look at me, but I felt the weight of his presence beside me. I knew he'd supplied the copy, the policy, the proof. From the speaker, I heard my boss sputter. That was a joke, out of context. The CFO cut him off. Your voice note, Mr. Daniels. He nodded to compliance. A faint clip played. Daniels' slurred voice in the back of a car, bragging about teaching her a lesson about contribution. No one moved. Even through the muffled feed, the shame in the room was palpable. Finally, HR slid a small envelope across the table. Effective immediately, she said, clipped, professional. Administrative leave pending final review. Please surrender your badge, company card, and laptop. The scrape of his chair was sharp, angry. I pictured his face, red, jaw tight, charm evaporated. He stood, tried one last deflection. This is a misunderstanding, Then it happened. As he reached for his wallet, something slipped. A corporate Amex, the one he'd forgotten that night, slid onto the table. It lay there in the silence, glinting under the light, while no one touched it. No one laughed, not even him. I sat at the bar, heart pounding, soda water warm in my hand. My proof had spoken. My silence had bloomed into a storm. And for the first time since that night, I felt my breath steady. The reckoning wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Receipts don't blink. They offered me his title before the dessert menu. That's how fast power shifts. One moment, Daniel was being walked out with his blazer over his arm. The next, the CFO was turning to the rest of the table, eyes heavy but calm, saying, "We'll need an interim lead, effective tonight." His gaze fell on me, not in pity, not in surprise, but with recognition. By the time I stepped into the private room, summoned by the compliance director, the plates were still warm, the wine still half full. Daniel's chair sat empty, pushed back awkwardly, like a ghost of arrogance still lingering. The CFO gestured. "You've been carrying this team quietly. That ends now. What do you want?" I hadn't expected the question. My throat went dry. I thought about revenge, about taking his seat just to prove I could. But that wasn't what burned in me. What burned was fairness. I want the people who've been covering his mess to get credit, I said, steady but firm. I want back pay for the dinners he made them split. I want a wellness budget for the team so nobody feels like a burden when they say no to this nonsense. And I want my name on the QBR deck, in print. The CFO's lips twitched. Not quite a smile, not quite disapproval. Just calculation. Then, done. And for me? I asked. My voice didn't shake this time. Promotion, raise, and a new reporting line, direct. The silence stretched. Then the CFO nodded once. Consider it written. It should have felt like triumph. In a way it did. But as I walked out of that room, the applause muted. I knew I didn't want his chair. I wanted choices. So 2 weeks later, after contracts were signed and the back pay hit everyone's accounts, I handed in my notice. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I had leverage now, and I used it to step into a role at a company where the policies I'd memorized weren't just words on a page. On my last night, I went back to that restaurant. Sat at the bar again, same seat, same soda water. The manager brought it over, this time with a smile. On the house, he said. I left a tip that was bigger than the bill, slid the folded place card from that first night across the counter, and pushed it toward him. That chapter's closed, I said. When I stepped outside, the night air was cool, clean. For the first time in months, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel humiliated. I felt finished. Daniel had written the beginning of this story, but the ending, that was mine.